A little over a year ago, I had a serious woodworking injury, and I learned a lot that day. But one of the most enduring lessons was how ill-prepared I was to provide the immediate first aid that I needed. My first aid kit was not easily accessible, and it contained a lot of junk and filler, and little of what I actually needed. I also didn't have a plan in place that was sufficient for dealing with something more serious than a cut. Since that time, I've spoken to a lot of woodworkers, and I found that virtually none of them are prepared for catastrophic shop injuries. You may think you're prepared. After all, it's just common sense, right? Stop the bleeding, get help. But you have to understand what happens to your mind when something very serious occurs. You may think of yourself as a tough guy with a clear head, but when you're looking at your own shredded flesh or gaping holes or pieces that came off, you're not going to be tough anymore. Some people get confused. Some get physically ill. Some get dizzy. They may even pass out. Even if you manage to keep a level head, you're likely to suffer the effects of shock. Your hands will shake. You'll forget things, such as where the first aid kit is or how to treat the injury you sustained. In my case, I couldn't find my keys. I had difficult swiping to unlock and dial my phone. My first aid kit wasn't even in the shop at the time. Of course, I lived, but I also didn't cut anything off. If my injury had been much worse, my lack of preparation may have cost me dearly. You really need to plan ahead, to train yourself for specific scenarios and set things up ahead of time so you can do what you have to do with minimal thought and effort. This starts with your first aid kit. You should have a first aid kit in the shop itself, not in the house nearby the shop, in the shop itself, within steps of where an injury is likely to occur. You should know exactly where it is so you don't have to hunt for it. I like wall-mounted kits like this one because they can't get moved or buried under junk. They can't be borrowed and not replaced. It's immediately visible to me and anyone else who may not be familiar with my shop. Another reason for a wall-mounted kit is accessibility. If you're alone and a hand injury occurs, you may have to work one-handed. So I don't like zippers to open kits or containers that I have to hold down with one hand and remove a lid with another. If you can't open it easily with one hand, I think it's a bad choice. I also like a wall-mounted cabinet because I can see everything at a glance. There's no digging, no fumbling around. Remember, your brain may not be running at full capacity. You may not even remember what you have in your kit, but if you can see it all laid out in an organized way, you can quickly scan it with your eyes like a menu and know what your options are. I bought this cabinet empty online. I could have bought a pre-assembled kit in a cabinet like this, but those contain a lot of filler, which is fine. Almost all of it's useful. The problem is they don't leave extra room for some of the things that you need to add for catastrophic woodworking injuries. And I don't want to put those things in a separate trauma kit for really bad injuries. I want everything simple in one place and ready to go. So I started with an empty cabinet and then I customized it to my needs. I'm going to put a list of everything in this cabinet below this video. I'll also put links to all of it so you can find it online if you need to. But for the sake of this video, instead of going through the list, I think it'll be more valuable to discuss certain scenarios that may come up in your shop and how I might use specific items in my kit to treat them. First though, I have to remind you that I don't have any formal medical training or certification. Get yourself a reliable first aid guide and read it thoroughly. Review it at least once a year. Keep it with your kit. If anything I say contradicts the advice in that guide or advice that you may get from a medical professional, default to that advice, not to what I say. With that said, let's begin with the most common injury that you're likely to receive in a woodworking shop, a small cut or splinter. Splinters can be difficult to remove. Sometimes you have to dig at it with a knife. I like tweezers that have sharp points so I can use them to dig beneath the skin and grab that little bugger. These are much more useful than regular tweezers in my opinion. I also keep a set of lighted reading glasses in my kit in case I need help seeing what I'm doing. They're also useful for folks that may have trouble reading the fine print instructions on anything inside the kit. You don't want to be searching for your reading glasses when there's an emergency. Whether it's a splinter or a small cut, the best thing you can do is wash it well with soap and water. That should be enough to ward off infection, but It may also be a good idea to stock a tube of antibiotic cream in case the cut is deep or difficult to fully clean. You should always cover a wound, at least until it stops bleeding and stays shut on its own. For this, you should have various types of Band-Aids, including those for knuckles and for fingertips. I personally don't like to leave a bandage on my hand for very long. They get nasty and dirty, and I'm filming with my hands. I can't have that on video. If I think a wound needs long-term protection, I prefer a liquid bandage substitute. This stuff is great because it stays flexible and it lasts for days even with regular hand washing. Again, I'll put links to all this stuff below. If a cut or puncture is a 1/4 inch deep or more, you should seek medical attention because you may need more cleaning than you can do yourself. That said, some folks keep super glue in their first aid kits for closing up wounds that would otherwise need stitches. Now, I'm not telling you to do that. I'm not even recommending the particular brand of glue that you see in my kit because I can't speak to its medical uses. I will only say that little single-use tubes will ensure it isn't dried out when you need it for whatever it is you may choose to use it for. Now let's talk about more serious injuries. If a cut is very deep, you definitely need medical attention. But first, you have to stop the bleeding. That is your top priority. This means applying pressure with whatever you can. Your shirt or a clean, dry rag, grab whatever's nearby and press it against the wound. That's going to hurt, but you got to get the bleeding stopped. If you can get the wound elevated over your heart, do that too. If you're bleeding fairly heavily, you may need some help getting it stopped. In that case, it's good to have a hemostatic bandage on hand. This contains enzymes that will help your blood clot quickly. It's just a strip of folded up gauze that can be wrapped around a small wound, or you can apply it folded like a pad on top of the wound and just press it in place. Another option is some wound seal, which is a powder that you can dump on the wound to help it clot. If the bleeding is very heavy, especially if it's bright red and pulsing or spurting from the wound, you don't have time to mess with powders and patches. You just need to apply lots of pressure. So your next choice may be what is known as an Israeli bandage. These were developed for military use and feature a dressing pad to cover the wound, an easy to apply elastic wrap, and a clever closure bar to adjust the amount of pressure required to stop the bleeding. These can be lifesavers on serious leg or arm injuries. An Israeli bandage is a safer alternative, in my opinion, to a tourniquet. But if you cut off a body part or you sever a major artery that's spurting blood, you need to stop that bleeding right now. Don't think you're going to take off your belt and MacGyver something like on TV. It's not as easy as it looks, and you don't have time to screw around. That's what a tourniquet is for. Get yourself a good one. You do not want it breaking on you. Again, I'm not an expert. You need to take the time to find some reliable videos so you can learn when and how to use things like Israeli bandages and tourniquets properly. I'll link to a couple below. Watch them and make sure you understand how to do it. Your life may depend on it someday. To this point, we've been focusing on just getting the bleeding stopped. Depending on the severity of the wound, meaning you haven't cut any major arteries or removed any body parts, you may get things under control fairly quickly, and then you can turn your attention to secondary concerns. If you can stand the pain and the wound is such that you have a few minutes to spare, you may choose to clean it with plenty of cool water before going to the hospital. Cleaning well and early can be critical to avoiding infection and beginning the healing process. If the emergency room is busy, you may be forced to wait a long time before they clean it. So if you can at least do a good rinsing yourself, you'll be ahead of the game. Next, you'll want to cover it with something other than your shirt or an old rag. If it's a big wound, you may have to just cover it with lots of gauze. Wrap on as many layers as you need and hold it in place with some tape. Gauze is cheap and sterile. I keep a bunch of it in my kit. But here's something to keep in mind about gauze. It'll stick to your wound and hurt like crap when they peel it off. So will your shirt or rag for that matter. So if the wound isn't too large or bleeding too badly, cover it with a non-adhering gauze pad first. This will be so much better when it's time to take it off. You can hold the pad on by wrapping the whole arm or hand or whatever it is in a roll of gauze, or you can just use tape to hold it on. Any tape will do, but medical tape tears easily, which is very helpful if you need a tiny piece or if you're working one-handed, and it won't pull off your skin when it's removed like some tape you might have laying around the shop. Another thing I like to use is a self-adhesive bandage wrap. This isn't sticky. It's a stretchy gauze that only sticks to itself. I believe it's covered in silicone. It's wonderful stuff, easy to use, so I like to keep some on hand. Now, what if you cut something off, such as a finger? Most woodworking amputation stories I hear involve going to the hospital and having to send someone back to the shop to retrieve the stray digits because nobody really thinks about that when the accident occurs. But that delay can be the difference between having something reattached or being too late. You really should plan ahead for this, just in case. Once you have the bleeding under control, the body part must be retrieved, wrapped, and kept cool, but not frozen, so it can be transported with you to the hospital. If you're alone, you're probably going to have to do this yourself. This is going to be very difficult, not only because you'll be in shock, but because you'll likely be doing it one-handed and your good hand will be shaking. You don't want to fumble around with stuff. So I made a couple of amputation kits, just in case. I unfolded some gauze pads to create a larger wrap made of several layers, and I lay that flat inside a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. I leave the bag unzipped so I can get inside it one-handed. So the amputated finger or fingers go in the middle of the pad, which is then folded in half like a taco. Then a cold pack is placed on either side and the whole thing is sealed up. I've written instructions on the front to remind me or anyone else who may use it what to do. I keep 2 of these in case multiple fingers are removed, and I keep them with the cold packs inside the first aid kit. Cold packs take the place of ice because most folks don't have ice in their workshop, and nobody wants to run all over the house getting ice and cloth and baggies. The way they work is you squeeze them to crush the insides, and they get really cold for about 15 minutes. That should be long enough to get it to the hospital, or at least minimize any damage if it takes you a bit longer. You do not want the body parts directly on the cold packs because you don't want the skin to freeze. So that's what the gauze wrap is for. Nobody wants to imagine putting their fingers in a baggie, but if that time does come, you'll be glad you planned ahead. Now let's take a look at a few more items in the kit. You'll need some scissors for various purposes. Any scissors will work, but the medical type are especially useful for cutting off bandages and clothing. I keep aspirin on hand in case someone has a heart attack. It should be uncoated, so it'll work quickly, and you should chew it. You might want to even write that on the outside so you don't have to think about it. Do not take aspirin for pain if you're bleeding. Aspirin's a blood thinner. Ibuprofen is my choice for emergency pain because you can take a fair amount of it and it won't prevent the emergency room from giving you other painkillers if need be. That said, you have to tell them what you took and how much. Ibuprofen also helps with inflammation from sprains and muscle injuries, but it's not in this first aid kit for headaches or that sort of thing. It's for emergencies, to cut the pain on the way to the hospital. Alcohol wipes are for cleaning your hands if there isn't a better way nearby, not for cleaning out wounds. You can use them to clean a wound if you want, but you may wish you hadn't. Hydrogen peroxide can be used to rinse off minor wounds if you don't have a sink nearby, but soap and water is always the best choice. I keep some gloves on hand in case I have to help someone else or someone else has to help me. It's good to have a sling as well. It will help keep a hand injury elevated and it'll help keep a broken arm still. Don't forget about eye injuries. I can't do eye drops myself, but I can do an eye cup with some boric acid solution. I also keep pads for covering an injury. Notice I keep that eye rinse and cup on top of the medicine cabinet because I probably am going to have difficulty seeing if I need to use it. There's also some burn cream inside just in case you need that. Finally, I keep a first aid guide on the outside of the box. You don't want an encyclopedia. You want a quick reference that's easy to read in case you're bleeding all over the place or your wife's panicking. All of this is packed neatly and well organized so you don't have to dig to find something. I also like to remove the excess packaging, especially on the critical stuff. My tourniquet is only held with a rubber band. My amputation kits are unsealed and they're close to the cold packs. I also love the little pockets in the door for the small items that would otherwise get lost. I wish it hadn't taken a serious injury for me to realize how much I needed this, but now that I have both a good kit and a good plan, I feel a lot better about my safety and the safety of anyone else who steps in my shop. Don't forget to check out the links below, and we'll see you next time. I've been a proud Tormek user for years. I've never seen so many clever innovations from just one small company, and the quality is simply uncompromising. Even if you're not in the market for a new sharpening system, You should check them out and see what they have to offer at the link below this video. There's a reason they're regarded as the best of the best. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.